What's the most spectacular way you've seen someone screw up at work? A grad student was invited into a professor's office for a meeting and was left alone for a moment. There was a pile of cumulative exams on the professor's desk that had just been graded. These are subject exams for grad students. Wickedly difficult, and you need to pass 4 to continue in the program. This moron decided he'd take a look at the stack of exams, then upon finding that some of his fellow students did poorly, he took pictures of their grades so he could use them to ridicule them and pass the results around the department. This was a big deal because numerical grades aren't ever given out for these exams, only pass and fail. And also, it's a pretty big FERPA violation to distribute others' personal academic information like that. FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. He was found out almost as soon as he sent the pics around and was dismissed and forbidden from campus immediately. Someone else had to pack up his desk because they were that serious about him never setting foot in the building again. Good frickin' riddance. I'm so thankful none of my classmates in my grad program were this petty and cruel. It's hard enough with everyone being supportive and awesome. The sheer idiocy of that dude is breathtaking. A co-worker received a promotion and a large raise. They were told they should thank the CEO as he initiated the entire promotion. My co-worker went on a rant about not asking for any of it, so he's not thanking anyone, and it escalated from there. By the end of the day, he was fired. My co-worker actually turned a promotion into a termination. One of my co-workers at a grocery store accidentally locked the only master key set into the security office, then attempted to break the door down with a claw hammer before anyone could find out. 10 minutes of furious attacking only succeeded in attracting the attention of everyone in the store, breaking off the handle and bending the entire lock, making it inoperable by the locksmith brought in later. Guy drops a glove in the deep fryer, sticks his entire hand in before realizing it's on and set to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Oops, I dropped the thing that's meant to protect my hand in that hot oil. Better stick my hand into said hot oil to fish it out. Oh no, there's hot oil on my hand. Who could have foreseen this turn of events? The author continues with another story. My current job is a lab technician at a major university, and we had a new guy unplug the small -80 degrees Celsius freezer full of recombinant DNA because he wanted to charge his phone. Ugh, yikes. I remember when I worked as a lab tech and another tech overfilled some of the wells in our stock DNA sample tray, contaminating all of the other wells. Then she just wiped off the excess and didn't tell anybody. Not only did we have to travel several hours to another university to get new DNA samples, but we had to throw out several weeks' worth of work since we'd unknowingly been using contaminated samples. I was once a bank teller. One day, a guy comes in to pay off a line of credit that he shares with his son. Apparently, his son is a substance addict and ran a line of credit up to $10,000, maxing it out. The guy comes in, talks to my fellow teller, pays it off, and signs to close it out. He asked my co-worker at least 3 times that it was closed. She assures him that it is. She's also addicted to her phone and loans most of her attention to it, by the way. The guy leaves. Several months later, the same guy comes in enraged with a line of credit bill. He comes to my window and explains the situation. He thought it was closed. It turns out that our bank's policy, not sure if this is universal, is that both he and his son have to sign off to close it out, unless there's some sort of special circumstance that never happened. The guy owed another $10,000 because of course his son isn't going to sign off on closing it out if he can run up the balance again. Dad says he's going to sue. I point him in the direction of someone more qualified than me. My manager tells me he has a good case and will probably beat out our corporate bank in court. I'm just a teller. Some days it's good to be on the bottom. Glad it wasn't me that messed it up. I work at a call center. I reviewed a call where the guy thought the phone was muted and called the customer a stupid moron. The customer called him out and he tried to backpedal and make up some story. He was fired shortly after. When I worked at a call center, this was a regular occurrence. I used to work at Popeyes, this fried chicken chain. It sucked and I eventually quit. A week after I quit, the night crew decided they didn't feel like putting the boxes away from a truck shipment. Someone could deal with it next day. Few days later, and several reports of food poisoning later, they got in a load of trouble. Boxes were full of raw chicken. I'm so glad that I quit. A couple of years ago, we had a new supervisor directly from corporate. He got a promotion and moved from another city. He was a complete jerk, micromanagement nightmare, arrogant, a few other things. But someone up in the corporate ladder really liked the guy, so he had full support from the bosses. Then in his first month of work, his company car was stolen. It was insured, so no big deal. A week later, his replacement car was stolen again, and a third car 2 weeks later. Turns out the guy had trouble with alcohol and he got really drunk and left the car open on the street and just forgot about it. He wasn't fired, he was just moved to a desk job with no company car. I used to work in a grocery store and I had an HR person repeatedly lose my doctor's note stating that I have Raynaud's syndrome and couldn't be in the freezer. I got a stack of them from the doc and would have to bring in a new one every few weeks. Finally, I had a department head fax a copy into corporate for me before dropping off yet another copy to the HR witch. The next week, the HR witch called me into her office and told me I was going to have to put the frozen load for bakery away. I told her I couldn't do it and I had a note on file. She told me she didn't have any paperwork on file for me and that she could make me do anything she wanted. I called my department manager into my office and told him what she had said. I got corporate on the phone and asked if they had received the copy of my doctor's note detailing the fact that I had Raynaud's syndrome and had already previously gotten frostbite at work from being forced to be in the freezer when I wasn't supposed to be. He said they had it and he then told them what HR Witch had said. He then handed HR Witch the phone. She had to hold the phone about 1.5 feet away from her face because they were yelling at her so loud. It was one of the most satisfying days ever working there. She went on leave shortly after that and never came back, and the official story was that she was having health problems. A substitute came into work completely hammered once. The job started at 8 and he drove there drunk. I get that junior high is stressful, but drink afterwards. That's not a great endorsement of the school he worked at the day before. One time, this complete moron I worked with in the shipyards, a pipe welder, was torching a pipe next to lagging, which is what helps insulate Navy ships. Instead of taking 5 minutes at most to use a blade to remove said lagging, the moron welded the pipe and torched the lagging. It doesn't burst into flames, but there was a lot of smoke and ended up getting the ship evacuated. He got fired 2 weeks later while his write-up was pending, because he put a ladder in the middle of a passageway, which are extremely tight when you consider the heavy equipment moving through. When he was asked to move, the welder told the person asking to F off. And when you tell that to the shipyard director, well, you tend to get fired. Worked in a single-story cinder block office with parking spaces out front. There was a big window that overlooked the parking lot. We had an older engineer, early 70s, that worked there. He pulled up one morning in his parking spot and must have gotten the brakes and the gas confused. He drove the car right through the window, taking out some of the wall with it. I can still remember seeing him gripping the steering wheel with this terrified look in his eyes while he kept slamming on the gas. The car must have gotten stuck on something because it would just lurch forward and the engine would rev. Luckily, he didn't kill anyone. He retired soon after that. It's actually a pretty common human error problem. People get the pedals switched in their head, and then panic causes them to lock their foot on the brake. We're fallible creatures. The narrator has fallen prey to this very problem before while riding a moped for the first time. It's amazing how long your brain can panic lock itself into holding onto the mechanical switch that does the opposite of what you need it to do. My coworker sold someone an auto insurance policy but forgot to check the effective date. Turns out she had pushed the start date of the policy out a month. Guy got into an accident a few days later. Cumulatively, we probably spent more than 10 hours on the phone trying to get claims to cover this guy's accident. She ended up messing up the effective date on about 10 other policies before she left. I work at a group home for people with mental and physical disabilities. Most of the residents can't walk or even stand on their own, so staff will help them stand or hold on to them while they walk so they don't fall over. Well, I had one coworker that was stupid. For multiple reasons, but this one takes the cake. She helped one of the residents stand up to use the restroom, had her put her hands on the handlebar attached to the bathroom, similar to the bathroom stall, and left to get things that the resident needed to take a shower. She left her standing there alone for a solid 3 or 4 minutes. Of course, the resident fell and hit her head pretty good. Had to go to the hospital and get stitches. She ended up being fine afterwards. How on earth my coworker wasn't fired is completely beyond me. I'm a welfare caseworker. A few months ago, I got a call from a client wondering what was going on with her case. Read the case comments and found out that one of my more intellectual coworkers shut down this case and assessed a 5-year overpayment on this client for her cash aid, basically saying that all the aid she'd ever received was fraudulent and she needed to pay it all back. Her reasoning? There was a glitch in the system that made this woman's child show as a resident in a different country. Rather than following established protocol and calling this woman, or ordering a fraud investigation from our literal unit of full-time investigators, or anything else that would make sense, She went out of her way to make this woman's life hard. For the record, I called the other county, and the worker I spoke with confirmed that the child was no longer a resident. His father had reported to them that the family was moving to our county 5 years ago, and they'd been trying, unsuccessfully, to update his county residence ever since. Because I caught the phone call, I had to unscrew the case and close out the overpayment. I work with preemies in a neonatal ICU. We get morphine in a multi-dose syringe that's good for 24 hours. We generally give doses for it every 4 hours. Every time we dose, we have to chart the amount in the electronic medical record, calculate a safe dose, draw it up, show it to another nurse along with the calculations, scan it. There's a million safety checks. A nurse did exactly none of these things and gave the whole syringe to the baby. Then she ordered another and did it again in 4 hours. And then she did it again 4 hours later. The baby got more than 3 days' worth of morphine in 12 hours. He had to be put on a breathing machine. Somehow, she did not get fired. There was a nursing shortage in Pennsylvania at the time. Sort of a similar situation. I worked in a blood bank and we sent some blood to the floor for a nurse to transfuse into a specific patient. Different nurse picked it up, doesn't look at the label, doesn't look at the patient name, doesn't do any of the 3 electronic checks and sticks it into a patient. Transfused the whole bag and then decides to let us know she made a simple mistake. No big deal. Okay, thanks, bye. Thank God the blood type matched, or she would have killed that patient. We're freaking out and filing reports to managers and the FDA. She gets a slap on the wrist and is transfusing the same patient later that day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. This one time I worked at a company who made shelter cloth, like for orchards. It was woven from plastic thread. There were these huge banks of needles that just ran and ran, making these giant rolls of cloth. The night shift guy was pretty new, and the night shift was just him and the machine. It would take most of the shift to do a full roll with a setup and takedown. The lunchroom was soundproofed because the production floor was pretty noisy. So the night shift guy basically just had to babysit the weaver all night and then change the rollout and set up for day shift. I came in early one morning because I wanted to pick up some gear I'd left in my locker, and I walk into the unholiest nightmare you've ever seen. A Gordian knot at least 30 foot high. The guy had sat there until like 2 a.m., the darkest part of the night. Then he decided to smoke some Mary J in the lunchroom and had fallen asleep. He woke up hours later to the sound of the weaver smashing itself to pieces. One of the needle banks had moved during the night and he hadn't seen the warning indicator. So then it had worked its way loose, then snapped, then flipped over and snapped the one next to it. Then it had made hundreds and hundreds of meters of messed up Frankenstein cloth with the giant kilometer-long thread bunches. I walked in to him screaming. He had woken up 15 minutes prior and had not got past freaking out. I could think clearer than him, so I went and got the big forklift and pulled this huge bird's nest off of the needle banks and slammed them in, and likewise hid the busted up ones in the dumpster. Then we started feeding in the new roll and just got the machine going again when the day shift came in. They were surprised that the night guy had got through the overnight materials so fast, but since it happened sometimes when the machine behaved, they didn't make a big deal. I went back to uni about 2 months later and never found out if the story continued. But the crazed look of the night shift guy screaming and holding his chest has stayed with me for 30 years. I can't imagine how much stress he was under, being brand new at a job and thinking that you had not only lost your job, but also completely wrecked the machine, a ton of material, and maybe been open to legal action might completely freak a person out. In 2009, we had some layoffs, like a lot of businesses, and one of those let go was a mechanic. Since most of the mechanics bring in a lot of their own toolboxes when one leaves the company, they'll need to load up their box. The screw-up was that the supervisor of the shop that day didn't pay attention or stick around while the mechanic was loading his box. The mechanic not only loaded up his box, he helped himself to several company-owned pieces of equipment totaling $18,000 in value. But because the supervisor wasn't doing his job, there was no proof that the mechanic took those items. This is the same supervisor who didn't notice when a huge spool of copper wire somehow rolled itself out of the building. Said supervisor no longer works here either. New coworker on her first day went to get coffee from the break room, was walking back to it when she just barely stumbled a little bit, just enough that some hot coffee dripped over the edges of the cup and burnt her fingers. So she reactively flung her hand and released the mug, causing lots of hot coffee to go all over the walls just outside the boss's office. She literally just stared frozen at the coffee-drenched wall and said, "Oh, geez." We gave her heck for it for about a year in a joking way. She actually proved to be a fantastic coworker. Used to deliver pizzas. Our dumb idiot manager that lived in a hotel and effed everything that moved contracted hepatitis A, but told no one and still came into work. After a few days, he began looking like an overweight banana and was complaining of all the classic symptoms. He was told to go home by corporate while we had to deep clean the store and throw away all of the ingredients due to possible contamination. In the middle of us cleaning, he decides to waltz in with what we think might be a working girl because he forgot his jacket. I was so dumbfounded that he would do this in front of one of the two bigwigs that were monitoring us. He was fired on the spot. 2 days after that, and our restaurant made the local news when a few people began to claim that they'd contracted Hep A from our pizza. There was a Hep A outbreak in our community at the time, so whether that was true or not, I'll never know. Sales suffered, and it took the store almost a year to recover. Let me tell you about Joe. Joe was hired as an entry-level developer. He started on a Monday. Every Tuesday, our team had a meeting in the first-floor conference room. Meeting time rolls around. No Joe. We wait. After a couple of minutes, I walk over to his cube. Not there. Check his break room. Nope. Stick my head in the men's room. Empty. Screw it. Go back to the meeting and tell my boss I have no idea. Maybe he forgot and was still at lunch. We start the meeting. A few minutes later, Joe walks in, about 15 minutes late. He apologizes and says he's been downstairs looking for the first-floor meeting rooms. Yes, he was wandering around the fricking basement looking for the first-floor meeting room. This was an omen of things to come. He was constantly falling asleep at his desk. He called out sick about 12 times in his first month. My boss finally told him one morning that they needed to have a talk. He had meetings most of the morning, so he told Joe to stop by his office around 11:30. Joe doesn't show up. Boss waits, and finally at 12 we go to get lunch. While we're gone, Joe comes in, gets all of his personal belongings from his desk and disappears. Never heard from him again. Now, whenever a newbie makes a mistake and is apologizing for it, we say, well, at least you know where the first floor is. I'm a cashier in a pharmacy. Anyone that works in the medical field knows that patient privacy is super important. When a patient picks up their prescription, we have to scan the receipt of their medication to the computer. This is unique to each individual prescription, so if it doesn't match, we accidentally grabbed someone else's medication. It catches mistakes before we make them. The alternative to scanning is typing the RX number into the computer. This doesn't guarantee a match. Only comparing the number on the receipt with the number on the computer will work if the barcode won't work. One day while I was on break, someone came in looking for a prescription. The girl covering my post clearly confirmed the date of birth, but grabbed someone else's prescription by mistake. 2 people with the same last name were next to each other in the fridge. But she didn't scan the receipt, so her mistake was not caught. She typed the number she saw on the computer, had the person sign for their medication, and gave them someone else's medication. Not 20 minutes later, the patient calls and tells us what he received was not intended for him. We, of course, apologized, and he came back to get his medication. The sad thing is, once something leaves the store, it can't be returned. We can dispose of it, but we can't use it for someone else, even if it's still sealed. This particular medication cost $4,000, and we had to throw it out. This, plus the breach of privacy, didn't stand well, and she was written up for her mistake. She doesn't use cash much anymore and is confined to packaging. Ouchies. Accidentally wasting medication to the tune of a very generous monthly salary is one heck of a thing for a manager to hang over your head for the remainder of your employment there. One of the cops on a base I was stationed at ran his vehicle right into the wing of a jet. He then decided to throw the light bar that had been sheared off into a random dumpster like it had never happened. That idiot was caught immediately. This literally happened last Thursday. New teacher at the daycare working in the baby room. Here's her list of what made everyone dislike her. 1. She told many aides she didn't like babies while working in the baby room. 2. She refused to change diapers, burp the babies, or even feed them in high chairs. 3. She just sat in the same chair and refused to do anything at all. 4. She wouldn't train new aides or help them in the room. And 5. She didn't care about bonding with the children or even her co-workers. But her biggest mess-up was that she let a baby roll off the changing table. According to my co-workers, she simply walked away from this child and left him there, and he rolled off and hit the floor. Apparently, she has a history of this, where other teachers and aides had to be like, "What the frick? Watch the baby and keep a hand on them at all times on the changing table." The only reason she took the job was because, and I quote, "Daddy won't give me spending money with my graduation present, so I'm just going to do this until July and then quit." Her grad present was a 2-week trip to Hawaii. She got fired for negligence, so good riddance. The baby is fine and the parents aren't suing or anything, and I can only think this is because the other teacher, who was feeding the new infant, was there, and they trust her heavily, and know she'd never put their son directly in harm's way. Good riddance. Worked at Arby's in 2016. It's approaching 10 p.m. and everybody working really wants to go home. A guy making sandwiches accidentally gets some bread stuck in the toaster oven. For some reason, he uses a knife with a plastic handle to try and get it out. The knife gets stuck, so he uses a second knife to get the first knife and bread out. That knife gets stuck, and he uses a third knife to get the other 2 knives and the bread out. Now all the knives are stuck in the toaster oven and the plastic handle starts to melt. In short, step-by-step guide to getting the toaster oven at Arby's replaced. Someone I worked with at a Toyota dealership didn't rack an SUV right on the lift, and it fell off. It really did way less damage than I thought, but he was fired on the spot. When I worked at Home Depot, a co-worker who worked in lumber crashed the forklift into a car and messed it up pretty bad. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.